I'll go ahead and get us started. Thanks for joining today's webinar hosted by the Fair Labor Association, focusing on effective grievance mechanisms. We're excited to have you all join us. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here to learn more about effective grievance mechanisms as we launch FLA's new toolkit on grievance mechanisms for companies. My name is Andrea Ackerman, and I'm FLA's Director of Civil Society Engagement. And we're also joined by a few other speakers today. So thanks to FLA's President and CEO, Jeff Vockrodt, who will be sharing a few opening remarks. And then we're also joined by colleagues from FLA's social compliance team, Gülden Ülker and Tzlil Rubinstein. We're also really grateful to be joined by Pradeepan Ravi from our civil society member organization, Cividep India. Pradeepan is programs lead at Cividep, and they'll be providing really helpful insights into the importance of grievance mechanisms for worker voice, as well as some of the challenges and opportunities for success that they've observed through their research on grievance mechanisms, as well as their deep engagement with workers in order to improve working conditions in global supply chains. Before we begin, and I'll quickly note that we do have a Q&A box where you can enter any questions you have in there, as the chat box is currently disabled. So we should have time for audience questions and discussion after we first hear from our speakers. So please don't hesitate to share your questions or comments throughout the webinar in the QA box. And feel free to ask anonymously. That option is always available to you. Additionally, today's webinar is being recorded and it may be shared publicly. So as for our agenda for today, we'll begin, as I mentioned, with a few opening remarks from our President and CEO, Jeff. And then we'll share background on what we mean by effective grievance mechanisms. And we'll hear from Pradeepan at Cividep, who will share how grievance mechanisms play an important role in safeguarding workers' rights. Following that, we'll present different sections of FLA's new toolkit on grievance mechanisms. And this will give you a better understanding of what the toolkit includes, as well as an overview of the different ways that you can use it. And then, as I mentioned, we'll close with an audience Q&A. So without further delay, I'd like to go ahead and get us started. So Jeff, please go ahead if you could share a few opening thoughts on grievance mechanisms and FLA's new toolkit for companies. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and welcome to everyone who's tuned in. It's great that so many of you could join us for today's webinar on our new Grievance Mechanism Toolkit for companies. As we all know, effective grievance mechanisms are critical to protecting workers in a company's global supply chain. They allow workers to directly raise issues and seek remedy. When workers see their grievances resolved, morale and job satisfaction increase, and more workers remain on the job. Grievance systems are also great mechanisms for companies to really understand what's happening on the ground at the factories that produce their goods. And in that vein, they help safeguard a company's reputation with consumers and investors. I think it's fair to say that brands without effective grievance mechanisms are much more likely to find themselves the target of negative campaigns focusing on issues that the workers are aware of, are unhappy with, and that remain unresolved. At FLA, we know that it can be challenging for companies to fully implement grievance mechanisms that demonstrate that labor rights concerns are taken seriously and resolved quickly. That's why we're excited to release the toolkit that's the subject of today's webinar, to support companies in creating and operating effective systems that promote worker voice and provide remedy. Before turning back to Andrea, I want to thank her and the excellent staff team that put this toolkit together. Thank Pradeepan and Cividep for playing an important part in today's webinar. And I want to stress a couple of crucial considerations related to grievance systems. First, working closely with civil society organizations and unions to design and implement grievance systems and remediation processes is vital. And second, as companies build effective grievance mechanisms, collaborating with other brands sourcing in the same factory is really the only way to achieve durable remediation of issues that surface. And FLA can be a platform to support collective remediation of grievances. So thank you for joining us today. I'm now pleased to hand the webinar over to our panelists to provide an overview and demonstrate key sections of the toolkit. And back to you, Andrea.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Very much agree with you that collaboration, particularly with unions, CSOs, and other brands when possible, is so helpful. So let's go ahead and move into our discussion today. And I'll just start with what we mean by effective grievance mechanisms. So a grievance mechanism is a structured way for workers, unions, and civil society organizations to raise concerns and seek resolution within the workplace. For factories, they serve as a key tool to detect, prevent, and address worker issues while ensuring that workers have a recognized voice. When a grievance mechanism works effectively, it signals to workers that management values their input and is committed to listening and responding. These systems provide safe channels for workers so that they can share their experiences, and they also confirm management's awareness of workplace realities so that they're able to pursue remedies. Visible and fair resolution of grievances boosts worker morale, improves job satisfaction, and reduces turnover. However, in contrast, when grievance mechanisms are weak or absent, workers lose trust. They often feel unheard, and dissatisfaction may grow. As far as international standards, the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or the UNGPs, have defined effectiveness criteria for grievance mechanisms. They've noted that mechanisms must be legitimate, so trusted by workers and stakeholders, and seen as fair and independent. They should be accessible, so barriers such as language, cost, and fear of retaliation need to be removed, and workers need to know how to use them. Grievance processes must be predictable, with clear steps, timelines, responsibilities, and possible outcomes outlined. They must be equitable, giving workers the information and support they need to participate on equal footing with management. Transparency is also essential. Workers should receive updates and outcomes should be reported while protecting workers' confidentiality. Outcomes must also be rights compatible, meaning that they align with international human rights standards and provide adequate, timely remedies. And effective grievance mechanisms are a source of continuous learning. So they help factories and companies prevent future issues and help companies with strengthening those grievance systems over time. They should be built on engagement and dialogue, ensuring that workers and stakeholders have a voice in the design and resolution of the process. As for FLA's requirements on grievance mechanisms, grievance systems are part of FLA's 10 core principles for responsible sourcing and responsible production to uphold and protect workers' rights. Companies must have functioning grievance mechanisms that workers can actually use. And so these requirements fit into FLA's broader framework for its company's labor management systems and commitments, which my colleagues will share more details on later in the presentation. So now I'll go ahead and hand it over to Pradeepan from Cividep, who will share insights on grievance mechanisms, particularly some of the challenges when it comes to implementing them effectively and opportunities for improving worker voice and participation based on Cividep's in-depth research, as well as their direct engagement with workers. Over to you, Pradeepan.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for having me here. First of all, a huge congratulations to FLA on launching this very important tool on grievance mechanisms. I must say it comes at a time when it is truly needed. Today, there is a lot of conversation going on about human rights due diligence, meaningful stakeholder engagement, and even sustainability reporting. These are, of course, positive steps in the right direction, but we must remember one essential thing, that access to remedy, which is the third pillar of the UNGPs, is just as important as due diligence. In fact, grievance redressal is really a key to make due diligence meaningful. I would stress on that, because identifying and preventing risks in the value chain is one thing, and effectively responding when harm happens is another. We want that response to be timely, accessible, predictable, as well as fair. Otherwise, it is just a system on paper, not something workers can actually use. So we say due diligence and grievance redressal should go hand in hand and complement each other. From this perspective, I would say FLA's work is both timely and important. We also hope this toolkit will improve how grievance redressal is handled by businesses across global value chains, especially for workers on the ground. Uh, yeah, Cividep has worked in sectors linked to global value chains like garments, footwear, and electronics for nearly 25 years now. We work closely with workers and their organizations, educating workers on their rights and entitlements, basically. Uh, because we are also close to the field, workers come to us and to our partner organizations with complaints about wages, working conditions, harassments, factory closures, and issues like that. We provide counseling to them and help them navigate various systems, be it internal factory committees or brand or MSI grievance channels or even judicial mechanisms. So we have seen firsthand how grievance systems work and more often how they don't. The reality is grievance systems exist in some form, but they rarely help workers in practice. Uh, there are strong laws to regulate workplaces. We can't deny that. They do provide legal mechanisms to protect workers. Factory level committees meant to address grievances are there. There are conciliation processes and labor courts as well, where which worker can access. But in the garment industry, these systems rarely function as they should. Not just in India, but in many production countries as well. Many factories we see don't even set up these committees, or even if they do, it's there only on paper. Workers and their representatives often have no real voice in it. Most workers don't know these committees exist, and even fewer know how to access or use them. So while these laws look strong on paper, it is not so effective on the shop floor. Our experience shows that there are two main reasons for this. One, lack of enforcement. Laws are not consistently implemented, and no one is held accountable when systems are missing or if they are dysfunctional. To the structural reality of the garment industry, it's highly fragmented. Production is highly fragmented, spread across many small and medium units with a largely informal temporary workforce, often without contracts or job security. This makes formal legal mechanisms extremely difficult to function effectively. And in response, in order to fill the gap left by this weak enforcement of judicial mechanisms, many brands and MSIs have created their own grievance channels in the form of hotlines, helplines, email addresses, mobile applications, and so on. We call these non-judicial grievance mechanisms, and they have been around for nearly 2 decades or more. But unfortunately, we have to admit that they are not working in practice. And the reasons are workers often don't know these systems exist. They are not trained to use them. And most importantly, they don't trust them to lead to real outcomes. Uh, Workers have a lot of grievances. Many are serious ones, but they don't see these systems as helpful or safe to raise complaints. So they prefer to basically stay silent. We should also reflect about why this is happening. The fact is, these non-judicial mechanisms tend to treat grievances as individual problems of workers, while many issues, as we know, are collective and structural by nature. There's no clear process, no predictable outcome, and there's no guarantee for anonymity also. And most importantly, these mechanisms do not have space for the people who workers trust, be it their representatives or unions or collectives. When we see there is no trust, no transparency, and when workers and their representatives are not really included, it's only natural that they avoid these using these channels. So we must admit that having a grievance mechanism might help tick a compliance box, but for it to truly work, much more needs to be in place, and brands need to think about that deeply. I believe this toolkit can help move the conversation forward, not just to build systems, but to build systems workers can actually use and trust. So, if both formal and non-judicial systems fail, if they don't help workers much? The answer is most workers don't report daily grievances because of the reasons I just mentioned. They only speak up when issues become intolerable or collective, like illegal mass layoffs or even sudden factory closures. Some workers try to resolve problems informally by reporting to line managers or to their supervisors, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. In places like Bangalore, where we work, where we have smaller unions and worker collectives, workers do bring grievances to these organizations, and these organizations try to resolve issues by providing legal support and so on. But there, sadly, these organizations also run with limited capacities, and their reach is also limited. So most of the time, many grievances remain unreported and unresolved. The questions that come here is, why do workers choose informal channels over formal ones? And we see the answer lies in workplace realities. First, a deep lack of trust. Workers I have seen complaints just being ignored, delayed, or dropped. Over time, they stop believing in receiving meaningful responses also from these channels. Second, power imbalances. Managers and supervisors, as we know, hold lot of authority. Workers fear retaliation just for speaking up, and their jobs are also at stake. Third, there is a strong stigma, especially around sensitive issues like sexual harassment. Social norms often blame or shame victims, making it even harder for them to come forward and report grievances. Fourth, many workplaces have a culture where shouting and verbal abuse are seen as normal management tools to discipline workers, especially female workers. This is common in manufacturing units in global supply chains, where harassment is used for discipline. And this culture does not just come from social norms, as we know. It is also systemic and shaped by brand practices like tight lead times, last minute changes to orders, and unrealistic production targets. These pressures just get passed down and fall heavily on workers. So unless we address these root causes, grievance mechanisms alone won't protect workers. Finally, job insecurity is a major barrier which often overlooked in supply chains. The reality is, even in the formal sector, many workers are informally employed with no contracts, no clear terms, and no job guarantees. They can be dismissed anytime, and that's a reality. So when your job is insecure, raising a complaint is a huge risk. So most workers choose silence over risking their livelihood. So these are the huge barriers that workers have to overcome to access formal grievance channels. And so what really needs to be done to change this? So of course, the toolkit will help you more with this, but I will just add a few points here. First, we need to allow collective grievances and representation. Many issues at the workplace are not individual, as I mentioned before, they are shared, and workers often feel more confident raising their voices together and not alone. That's why grievance systems must accept group complaints and recognize unions or worker collectives as legitimate representatives, even if those organizations are not formally recognized. Real representation matters to make these things work. And I know the toolkit covers the key issue and emphasize involvement of these stakeholders. Second, we have to go beyond just awareness sessions and training. Telling workers a system exists is not enough. What's needed is ongoing two-way dialogue between workers and management. Committees should include real worker voices, and they should be judged not just by their presence, but by how effectively they resolve issues. Third, we need to improve job security and formalization. Workers should have clear return contracts and stable employment. When jobs are uncertain, it becomes harder for workers to feel comfortable using grievance systems. Fourth, local grievance systems must actually work. That means properly forming statutory committees, recognizing worker representation at the factory level, building leadership of workers, and ensuring access to legal support. Obviously, civil society organization can support this process, but the system itself has to be functional, fair, and trusted. And finally, brands have to take responsibility. They may not directly be employing the workers, but they control the pricing, the production schedules, and the pressure. And with that control comes responsibility. Brands must engage meaningfully with workers and their representatives and ensure workers are protected from retaliation and make it clear to their suppliers that workers' voice is a strength and not a threat. I believe businesses can turn these principles into real action by strengthening collective voice, improving local grievance systems, and addressing the deeper structural issues that keep workers vulnerable. And if you do that, grievance systems can truly work and help workplaces be fairer and safer for everyone. I also believe this toolkit speaks to many of these challenges, if not all. And with that, I conclude and I wish everyone all the best, and especially to the FLA team. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pradeepan. As you very clearly demonstrated, there is a need for more effective grievance systems, as well as an enabling environment for worker voice to flourish, and an understanding of the power dynamics and nuance experienced by workers. FLA's toolkit provides companies with a great starting point for developing and implementing effective grievance systems, which should really complement, as Pradeepan said, other engagement with and participation by workers on the issues that are impacting them. We developed our Grievance Mechanism Toolkit to provide companies with a practical step-by-step guide to designing and operating effective grievance systems that truly function. We also developed it to address persistent industry challenges where many grievance mechanisms exist but aren't effective or aren't trusted by workers. We also developed it to support the measurement of effectiveness through tools such as audits, checklists, and surveys. And ultimately, we developed it to strengthen worker voice, accountability, and remedy across global supply chains while helping companies meet FLA and other global standards on labor rights. As for how the toolkit was created, the Fair Labor Association drew on its principles as well as its code of conduct and international standards, as mentioned, such as the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. And the toolkit was informed by a consultation with multiple stakeholders, including companies, FLA staff, auditors, civil society organizations, trade unions, and others, to really ensure that it's practical and realistic and grounded in real-world experience. As for who the FLA toolkit is for, this toolkit was designed primarily for brands, but it can also support suppliers and factories to help set them up or to help them set up grievance systems or strengthen their existing grievance systems. The toolkit can also be useful for civil society organizations, trade unions, and worker representatives who engage with or monitor grievance mechanisms. And it's also aimed at supporting both management and workers and creating channels that are trusted, accessible, and effective. So I'll now go ahead and hand it over to my colleague Tzlil, who will provide more background on the toolkit and what it entails.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Let's move on to do a more in-depth review of the toolkit. So before we start reviewing the toolkit, I just want to quickly show you where you can find it. It's available on FLA's website. On our homepage, you can click Resources at the top right. On the next page, scroll down a little bit and you'll see the toolkit, the first one on the left. You can download it and it's open to the public. And now let's go over its content so you can get a better understanding of what's included and how you can use it. The toolkit consists of two parts, the informational and practical items. I will first review the informational items and I will then hand it over to Gülden to cover the operational part. Let's begin by differentiating the two types of grievance mechanisms that some of them were mentioned by Pradeepan, interactive and non-interactive. These definitions relate to mostly how grievances are submitted and the interactions workers have when raising them. First, the non-interactive channels. These channels allow workers to submit their grievances through a specific grievance-dedicated platform, informing management of the grievance and triggering an internal process for handling the complaint. Examples here can include an anonymous digital or physical grievance boxes, a website or a QR code, an email or a phone number where workers can send a direct message to. An interactive channel, however, involves on-the-spot communication. It's usually with the manager and can take many forms as well. It can be an open door policy, an informal feedback session with management, regular worker management roundtables, union meetings, or a grievance hotline. As you'll see in the toolkit, there are pros and cons to each of these channels, so it is highly recommended to make sure that the factory has at least one of each. Establishing an effective grievance mechanism is a complicated task that involves navigating various challenges, as you heard. You might have already encountered one or more of these challenges, and we want to assure you that you're not alone. These hurdles are more common than you might think. We have identified a few main topics where challenges tend to rise. First, stakeholders' perspective. Workers can sometimes be suspicious or not trust the grievance mechanism. It can mean, for example, that they fear facing retaliation for using the mechanism. Second, management views on grievance mechanisms. If a brand isn't investing in these systems, it will be difficult to make them effective. This can show up as a tick-the-box mentality, for example, which means focusing on completing the checklist for an external assessment without doing root cause analysis that can help create sustainable solutions. Another challenge is having proper policies and procedures. For instance, ensuring anonymity through the process of handling grievances. Implementation is also a significant challenge. Even if all the policies are in place, a crucial part, for example, is the follow-up. Are the grievances being addressed in a timely manner? Do the workers know when to expect a response? While having the accessible platform to submit grievances is important, an equally vital component is what happens after the submission. And finally, a challenge for contract facilities. Brands have significantly less control over the grievance mechanisms in these facilities, making the mechanism much more vulnerable and potentially less effective. After reviewing some common challenges, you'll see in the toolkit we move on to outline some best practices as well. These are not theoretical methods, but tactics that have been tested and proven effective in strengthening grievance mechanisms. First, we talk about responsibility and accountability. A best practice here includes hiring a local staff member dedicated to receiving, tracking, and following up on grievance remediation. Second is communication. This includes building long-term, ongoing relationships with the suppliers and clearly communicating grievance policies such as non-retaliation to workers. An important practice regarding implementation revolves around gaining workers' trust, as was mentioned as a meaningful challenge. It can be accomplished through transparency. Another key practice is training, covering factory management, workers, and company staff. The review process is also critical. External evaluation is highlighted in the toolkit as the most effective way to review grievances. Next, policies and procedures. A best practice in this context would be ensuring grievance channels are accessible in workers' native language. And last, but definitely not least, is collaboration between brands, suppliers, and civil society organizations. Since factories often produce for multiple brands, any grievances raised there are shared responsibility. As Jeff mentioned, collaboration on remediation is one of the most effective ways to drive sustainable change. Even if brands differ in products or timelines, the grievances should be seen as shared challenges. Suppliers' collaboration is equally critical. They bring on-the-ground knowledge and insight into root causes and practical solutions. And as Pradeepan noted, civil society organizations, and especially unions, often hold workers' trust and deep community ties, helping to ensure that solutions meet the workers where they are. You'll find more on all of these best practices in the toolkit. Another element you can find in the toolkit is shown here, testimonials and tips. The example here, taken from the toolkit, is a testimonial describing how regular factory communication was meaningful. A social compliance senior manager shared they created a non-retaliation memo, included it in training, shared it factory-wide, and used it to support HR efforts. And now, for the final part of our theoretical section, let's look at the business case. Why is it in brand's best interest to have an effective grievance mechanism? When a grievance mechanism works well, issues are addressed and resolved. However, when it doesn't, the consequences for businesses can be serious and even irreversible. That's what makes the business case both urgent and strong. The business case largely comes down to risk management. A main risk associated with an effective grievance mechanism is reputational damage. This often happens when grievances go unaddressed and advocacy groups respond with campaigns that bring negative attention to the brand. Damaged reputation can quickly lead to consumer loss, which directly impacts revenue. It can also affect ESG ratings and trigger pushback from responsible investors, putting at risk both investment and shareholder confidence. Reputational damage can also bring legal and regulatory risks. While the global regulation on human rights and supply chains are still evolving at the moment, it is clear that workers' rights are increasingly seen as a legal requirement, and violations will come with financial penalties. Another consequence is recruitment challenges. Just as people need jobs, factories and brands need reliable and responsible workers. When people hear that a brand tolerates abuse, ignores grievances, or fails to respect workers' rights, it becomes harder to recruit and retain staff. For contract factories, that often means failing to meet production targets, which has cascading business implications and can ultimately drive away investors. For owned facilities, fewer workers mean lower production capacity, reduced orders, and eventually a loss of clients. And even beyond reputation, the immediate outcome of an ineffective grievance mechanism is workers' dissatisfaction, which in and of itself drives turnover. Workers who feel unheard or mistreated are more likely to leave for other jobs. High turnover then compounds recruitment challenges, directly affecting productivity and profitability. In the toolkit, you'll see additional potential outcomes and testimonials for the importance of the mechanism for business case perspective. And one final element I'd like to emphasize is the true cost of worker turnover. So beyond the immediate challenge of recruitment, the toolkit highlights the wide-ranging impact that high turnover can have on a company, an impact that often goes unnoticed. Let me share a few examples. First, their termination cost. When the workforce is unstable, severance pay and related expenses can quickly add up. Then we have vacancy costs. When permanent staff can be secured, factories often rely on temporary hires who may not stay long, may not be the right fit, and still needs training. And that training is another cost on its own, because most factory work is brand specific, meaning new workers have to be trained in processes tailored to the brand. That takes time, resources, and reduced production capacity. Hiring costs are another example. The repeated time and resources HR and administrative staff need to spend on recruitment, onboarding, and offboarding. Additional challenges can be, for example, skills and institutional knowledge lost when experienced workers leave, and directly tied to the business case, an unstable workforce undermines client confidence. So, in short, an ineffective grievance mechanism doesn't just affect workers. It directly undermines business stability, performance, and long-term sustainability. And now I'd like to hand it over to Gülden, who will walk us through the practical tools provided in the toolkit.
Thanks, Tzlil. Now I will walk you through the practical guidance provided in the toolkit to have effective grievance systems. And for that, toolkit first includes information on FLA's Principle 6 of responsible sourcing and production principles. As per Principle 6, each FLA member must ensure that there are functioning grievance mechanisms at all facilities, covering contracted and owned facilities, including ensuring at least one confidential channel is existing in the workplaces. In addition, companies need to ensure to have grievance policies and procedures with the capacity to manage grievance mechanism process, including recording and tracking process from receipt to resolution of the grievances. Another element under Principle 6 is evaluation of the systems. FLA has comprehensive requirements to evaluate the grievance system effectiveness, including ensuring lack of penalty and non-retaliation policies against workers. Other important standard is companies need to provide an alternative channel for workers to contact the brand directly and confidentially. And lastly, providing training and communication to all workers, supervisors, and managers about all available grievance channels, policies, and procedures is another requirement under Principle 6. The toolkit provides details on how effectiveness of grievance mechanisms is measured through FLA principles. As Andrea mentioned in the beginning, FLA follows UNGP criteria to ensure effective grievance mechanisms. And if you want to categorize briefly, we can say that Principle 6 contains 3 components to evaluate the grievance system effectiveness. First one is the monitoring systems, which could cover grievance mechanism components, which could be the true audits. Second is providing an alternative channel to ensure that there are functioning grievance mechanisms at each facility. And third is ensuring that workers, supervisors, and managers at facilities receive training and communication at least annually. And in the toolkit, you will see some guiding details on what could be these trainings are, such as employee handbook, orientation or onboarding trainings, in-person or online trainings, any awareness or trust-building activities. And also you can find information on how factory audits should assess these grievance mechanism trainings and measure their frequency. Other example could be policy and procedures, and the toolkit provide information what brands grievance channel and procedures should include. As you can see in here, since it's important to define the roles, responsibilities, and the whole grievance handling process. Now I would like to provide some practical information on what Toolkit provides on challenges and best practices on the audits. For many companies, audits are the primary method used to evaluate grievance mechanisms, but they can fall short when measuring the effectiveness. To ensure that the effectiveness of grievance mechanisms is accurately measured, it is critical to understand common audit challenges, audit best practices, and additional tools to supplement the audits. And the toolkit provides guidance on how audit methods and quality influence the grievance mechanism effectiveness check, which I'll be mentioning in the next slide. The most common audit challenges on grievance mechanisms could be limited time spent to evaluate the performance and the effectiveness of grievance systems during the audits. Like not in every audit methods, assessors can dedicate enough time to really understand grievance systems effectiveness. Other element is audit quality differences, which can cover both tool quality and auditor efficiency. Audit tool coverage is crucial. For instance, whether management system questions such as policy, procedures, training questions are covered or not in the tool itself, or design of the question set, number of the worker interviewed might lead to limitation on checking effectiveness as well. Auditor ability is another factor, as it's quite important to gain trust of the workers during interviews, such as ensuring that management is not coaching workers, or having skills on verification process, including doing a comprehensive document review, etc. Another element on common challenges could be on how brands are reviewing the audit results and how communication is maintained with the suppliers and the auditors on the findings. Whether auditors provide direct feedback to the brands on grievance mechanisms, or suppliers involved in the discussions on root causes or remediation plans on the grievance findings and such. And following the challenges, best practices could include selecting auditors based on their experiences and assessment skills, and companies are recommended to evaluate their performance, performance of the auditors. And the other good practice is regularly reviewing and updating audit tools through benchmarking with other tools, receiving feedback from auditors or other peers. And ensuring the audit tool and the methodology includes the ability to test the grievance mechanisms. And the audit tools contain all required components that we have already mentioned, like assessing policy and procedures, trainings, checking at least one confidential channel, or union or worker representative structures. You can also see more details on the toolkit itself. Other best practices conducting supplemental audits focused solely on grievance mechanisms, or adding a more vast supplemental section that goes beyond the standard audit tool could be another option. And there is a focused audit tool included in the toolkit, which covers a list of questions that can be added to standard audit tools of member companies and support the verification process, or used as a standalone grievance mechanism audit. FLA members can access this tool in member dashboard, which is also linked in the toolkit as well. Well, there are additional tools beyond audits that can assess grievance mechanisms and their effectiveness. And these could be communication with workers directly, such as with worker surveys. Worker surveys can be developed and conducted by the company, by the supplier, or conducted jointly. But one quick point in here to mention is, which is crucial, to ensure that surveys are done anonymously to prevent the risk of retaliation. And of course, effective worker interviews are also essential to evaluate the functioning grievance mechanisms. Although workers are usually interviewed as a part of the factory audits, it's useful to interview workers outside of the audit process as well. And data analysis could provide insights into the effectiveness of the grievance mechanisms, meaning that setting up your grievance management tool, identify all the specific data categories, analyze them to identify trends, patterns, and the gaps. And this information gives your company important insights about what needs to be addressed to improve the grievance systems. And finally, regular testing of grievance channels is also covered in the toolkit to evaluate the effectiveness. And you will see some popped up key points throughout the toolkit, as you can see on the right for this section as well. And as a last slide, I would like to show what toolkit includes on understanding the reasons of not receiving grievances, as companies may report no or a low number of grievances filed through their direct channels. However, this doesn't mean that the workers are not having issues. The reasons might be that workers are unaware of the grievance mechanisms or don't know how to use it, or the grievances raised were mishandled, not responded on time or properly, or retaliation cases exist that leads to workers' mistrust and such. So the toolkit includes checklists to reflect on those potential reasons, which could be related to company processes, company engagement level with factories, or organizational culture in the factories, or level of the trainings and awareness, and so on. And with that, we are coming to the end of our presentation, and I would like to hand it over to Andrea again for Q&A section. Thanks for joining and listening. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much. So we are getting a few questions into the Q&A box, so please don't hesitate to put your questions in there. We have about 15 minutes or so, and if we can't get to your question, we can follow up later. So I'd like to start with our first question, and I'd like to give this question to Pradeepan. So how can companies ensure that workers' voices are genuinely shaping grievance systems and shaping the workplace, especially in contexts where unions are weak, suppressed, or do not exist altogether?
Thank you, Andrea, for that question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, in the garment industry, the reality is that we don't have strong worker representation at the factory level. I mean, be it in any production country, I think that's the reality. So obviously, I think there's no kind of alternative for freedom of association. So companies have to continuously engage with their suppliers in enabling the right to freedom of association at the factory level. But when the reality is different, they have to look for other ways to do this, right? I mean, while investing to enable freedom of association. So even if there are no unions or representation of workers at the factory level, there are organizations at the community level which are closely working with workers. It will be there are different kinds of civil society organization. One that works with women, especially on their rights and entitlements. There are other organizations which do different kinds of work, but they are very close to the workers. So so effort must be made to engage with these organizations to know about the lives of workers and where they are coming from and so on. And now with human rights due diligence and so on, I mean, meaningful stakeholder engagement is being institutionalized in many places. So these are also places where these stakeholders should be invited, and I mean, through them, the workers' voices could be heard. But yeah, just expecting that individual workers' voice could be kind of tapped into, I think that's something we have to be little skeptical about. So it is always collective voice that is powerful, and workers' representation should be enabled at any cost by the companies. Yeah, it's not a direct answer, but I think it's a long-term work that needs to be carried out.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much agree with you. Thanks for that. Okay, so we've got a number of questions coming in. So our next question is around contract facilities. So where, as we heard, brands have less control, and as we know, brands have less control. So what can brands realistically do to ensure that grievance mechanisms are credible and not just a tick box exercise? Tzlil, maybe you can start with that one.
Thanks, Andrea. And thanks for this question. I think that mostly you could see it in our best practices recommendations. You saw there that the first one would be to hire local staff that really is responsible for grievances appointed by the brand, creating collaboration between the different brands that manufacture in the same factory. That can also be very helpful. And creating long-term relationships with the supplier. It is a challenge. It's not, there's no one way to address this, but I think that you can see that if once you try one of these and kind of see where it takes you, I think this would be a good first step. And yeah, Gülden, feel free to add if you have anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, especially, and it's also responding another question in the, I was just checking the questions in the chat box, how handling multiple grievances in one supplier, grievance mechanism systems from the brands in one supplier. I guess that collaboration comes in that part. If you are sharing a factory with another brand, you can definitely merge your efforts to identify the grievances and resolve those grievances together. Because yeah, otherwise it will be a hard effort, I guess, to maintain that process effectively. So the collaboration really, I think, important in that case.
Thanks both. And I want to continue on this theme, with contract facilities. How should brands be working with their suppliers to ensure and verify that their grievance systems are efficient and effective enough? Gülden, maybe you can start.
Yeah, I can take that one. And as we have already talked about during the slide presentation as well, it's important basically to have management systems to ensure you have capacity to manage those grievances. If you are receiving no grievances, basically you are having a problem because there are problems in the factories that workers are having. And if there is an effective way, you will receive grievances. That's the first, I guess, sign that you can check. And of course, during the monitoring process, you can identify the effective. You can just do the effectiveness check through the monitoring tools. You can add supplemental tools, as we have mentioned. If there is any problem you received about the grievance mechanisms, for instance, you can do a more comprehensive assessment focusing on the grievance mechanisms to understand if it's effective or not. And surveys can help as well. Anonymous surveys can help as well, that workers are raising their voices if the grievance mechanisms are accessible or usable for them. And of course, union representatives, worker representatives, they should be always in the dialogue to check the effectiveness of the grievance mechanisms in the suppliers. So regular dialogue with the suppliers is also another important thing to maintain that, relationship and the effectiveness check for the grievance mechanisms.
Well, great. So there are a few questions around the fear of retaliation. We know that this is a persistent barrier when it comes to workers reporting grievances or issues that they're facing. So, what would be the best practices to encourage workers to express their concerns and not be, afraid of HR or factory management? How can we ensure that workers really trust the grievance system and trust that they're not going to be retaliated against? So Pradeepan, perhaps we can start with you on that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in my presentation earlier, I covered the aspect of power asymmetry in the shop floor. So as you know, garment industry is dominated by female workforce. But sadly, at the managerial level, at the supervisor level, we largely have men, occupying those jobs. And it is very apparent on in the shop floor, the gender dynamics, as well as how verbal abuse and the yelling at workers, shouting at workers is used as a tool to kind of discipline workers and also to extract work. So that aspect, I think brands have to reflect on their practices, basically how short lead times, how the way they put their orders, the unpredictability around that also affect practices on the shop floor. So that they have to have a dialogue with their suppliers, as they place their orders and so on. And the other thing is also to invest in some of these changes, right? Bringing some of these changes on the shop floors. How this power asymmetry could be bridged. How can workers be empowered? How we also have participation of female workers in managerial roles, in supervisory roles. So all these will play a big role in kind of changing this aspect. So then workers will feel confident to report grievances, that they will also feel that it will be responded to, and there will be not any retaliation. So yeah, a lot needs to be done there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're getting some questions in from the company perspective, and, I think that's primarily our audience today. So, one question came in around, it's not always easy to entertain the grievances. Workers might continue to submit grievances about, the same things. So this commenter noted their salaries and food, and that you can't make everyone satisfied. The same grievances continue to pop up. So how do you cope with that? How should companies and their suppliers be coping with that? Because not taking action leads to workers not trusting the system. So how do you continue to build trust while also acknowledging that, not every, issue is going to be resolved, or not every issue is going to be a priority? Gülden, you want to go ahead?
Okay.
Maybe you can.
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, it's a common problem for the suppliers and the companies. I think what is important in here, how you are managing that process. I mean, if you are providing feedback for workers on their grievances, for instance, even it's not totally resolving the problem of the workers, it's quite important to give that value on that grievance, for sure. And I guess it's also depending on for food, for instance, it's very, a changing idea for everybody. So you cannot, of course, satisfy everybody on that topic for sure. But I guess finding a middle way or balance in the factories could be the solution in here. And I think worker representatives are quite important in those cases where the workers are collectively raising the same grievances. They can definitely help to, as a communication channel, they can definitely help to mitigate that chaos on that resolution process, even it's not resolved for the workers entirely. I think it's more of like how you are managing that process, how you are providing that feedback, how you are communicating back with your workers. That's why companies and the suppliers need to have those robust management systems. Actually, that's why we are highlighting that as well.
Thanks,
Can I
Gülden.
add a point here if you don't mind?
Please go ahead.
Very quickly. To address this, I think the culture of dialogue should be encouraged in the shop floor. I think that's very important. I already in my presentation mentioned about statutory committees. In several countries, I think it's there in the laws itself to constitute statutory committees. In places where it is not there, I think companies can still invest to develop these structures inside the shop floors where there is a possibility for ongoing dialogue on all these matters, which will not require immediate resolution, but each party's employees and workers can work out a solution together on an ongoing basis. So that will resolve most of these problems, the day-to-day issues of workers, not requiring immediate solution, but on a dialogue basis, they can resolve amicably.
So go ahead and then we'll close out after this one.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I completely agree with both of what Gülden and Pradeepan said. And I just wanted to add two more points. That one would be to publish across the factory, on the factory floor, how grievances were handled, to obviously anonymously, but to share that grievances were being taken care of. What was the outcome? How long did it take? That's an effective way to kind of gain workers' trust, and also to perhaps show workers that, oh, this complaint and this grievance has already been submitted, and this is what happened. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it might help. And another way is to do a further root cause analysis, to see, because some complaints usually have a deeper background than what it's on the surface. If there's complaint about food, then why? Maybe the kitchen has some hygienic issues, or maybe there's the budget issue, that the food is not fresh enough, or there are probably ways that the grievance system might see the end of it, but if you go 2-3 steps back, you might be able to solve this problem in a more sustainable way.
Excellent. Thank you for those very informative answers. And I do apologize that we don't have time to get to every question today. And I do see a lot of questions unanswered. So please do feel free to reach out to us at FLA, and we would love to continue this conversation with you. I will note that for FLA members, we'll be conducting a grievance mechanism training for our members in October. So please do join us for that if you're able to. And as I shared, for more information on FLA's Grievance Mechanism Toolkit, please do feel free to reach out. We'll be sending this presentation out to those who registered, so you'll have our contact information, and I'm happy to put my information in the chat as well. That said, again, thank you all for joining. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you especially Pradeepan from Cividep, who took time out of his day, particularly late in the day for you. So we really appreciate you all being here. And again, please take care and don't hesitate to reach out to us. All right. Thanks, everyone.